On Sunday, March 10th, 1822, 4 men and 6 women swore an oath together in District School Number 1 on the corner of Concord and Adams Street in the village of Brooklyn. Their idea was to organize a house of worship and to found the only Presbyterian church in their settlement of 7,000 people.
They swore an oath to covenant with God and each other, to walk together as brethren and sisters in the Lord, according to the faith and form of government of the Presbyterian Church in these United States.
The 6 women then remained passive, according to a 1947 history of the event, while the 4 men chose from among their own number 3 elders. At that time, women had the same power to elect elders as they had to elect presidents, which was none whatsoever.
The elected men were Zechariah Smith, Selden Gates, and Ezra Woodhull. To modern ears, their names seem filled with such gravitas that even if these elders hadn't founded a church, we would expect one to spring up anyway, once their names were spoken.
But before plans were drawn or money was raised for the physical structure, this first Presbyterian church lived in the collective imagination of these 10 people. In this new community, they wanted a home for their Presbyterian faith.
In 1800, their simple hamlet only went by the name of Brooklyn Ferry, a small pocket of tradesmen's houses near what is now known as Fulton Ferry Landing. Gradually, the hamlet and the land beyond it became both a destination and a point of departure. Wealthy investors made their fortunes in Manhattan, then went looking for suitable property across the East River and away from the stink and clamor of the city. Meanwhile, those who already resided here, the tradesmen and farmers, found compensation bringing farm produce and milk to the boat slip on their side of the river. They loaded their products in a ferry, powered by horses that walked a treadmill paddle wheel, to ford the Whitecaps across the seemingly impossible distance to Manhattan and its city appetites on the opposite shore.
But change was, quite literally, in the air. The yellow fever epidemic that had for so many years gripped the new nation was now beginning to abate. The American economy was recovering from the financial hardship following the War of 1812. In 1816, this hardscrabble community received an official charter from the state of New York, making it now the Village of Brooklyn. Only 2 years before this, the newly initiated steamboat ferry cut travel time across the East River to a heart-stopping 12 minutes. Suddenly, new life seemed possible. Everything felt like a leap of faith, not just for churches, but also for the people who could fill them.
In the newly minted Brooklyn Village, streets had to be laid in a grid, sidewalks had to be put down, and something had to be done about the swine problem along Hicks Street. The village became a place of commercial transactions so that when the yellow fever subsided, the new fever of speculation took hold. Personal fortunes could rise and then be dashed, only to reform again like the river waves against the shoreline. Early entrepreneurs included Philip Livingston, who held vast tracts of Brooklyn land out of wealth drawn from the slave trade. Slavery would not be abolished in New York until 1827.
Hezekiah Pierpont was a rich importer who lost everything when his ship was stolen by pirates on the South China Sea. But he rebuilt his reputation in Brooklyn, married into great wealth, and became rich again. Land was the only stable commodity in this changing world, and once it was bought up, it could be parceled off for profitable gain. The district known as Clover Hill was renamed Brooklyn Heights and acquired its own reputation as America's first suburb. And perhaps to attract future homeowners, streets had sprung up with whimsical-sounding names like Pineapple, Willow, Orange, and Cranberry.
This was the neighborhood through which Ezra Woodhull regularly walked from his house on Pineapple Street. And through the auspices of his church's newly formed Board of Trustees, Woodhull selected a tract from the old Hicks farm and then purchased the plotted out land for their new house of worship.
It was to be located near the corner of Cranberry and Hicks Streets. Plans were drawn up and accepted to construct a brick building with a steeple 120 feet high. with a basement for lectures and Sunday school classes. The tower was to contain a clock and a bell, and since it was to be such a tall edifice, the bell was later employed for use by the local fire department. The estimated cost of the structure was to be $12,000.
Within 13 months, the church was built. All that it needed now was a minister. Some were called for the position, but for their own reasons refused. In the meantime, other established clergy were invited to preach at the dedication ceremony on April 24, 1823. A church choir sang to accompaniment of a bass viol. The tiny congregation persevered without a permanent minister, a situation that would prove to be familiar in the history of the church, until finally a young Princeton Seminary graduate decided to throw in his lot with the steadfast parishioners in what was known as the Brick Church on Cranberry Street.
But who were these founders, our church fathers and mothers? No streets bore their names. They weren't rich from land deals.
Perhaps their greatest distinction, beyond their resourcefulness, was their faith in housing their religion in this new precinct of God's world.
In that moment, on March 10th, 1822, when Ezra Woodhull and his companions promised to walk together as brethren and sisters, who knew how far that trek would take them?
Who knew that their walk would become our journey of faith for 200 years, and God willing, beyond?